Hi, this is Keela Rose, back again with another deep dive into a book that I frankly really enjoyed reading, Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. I'm a huge fan of his Magician's trilogy, not so much a fan of the show, but the books were great. Although the second book, we could talk about the second book, but I really love so many different parts of even that book that the trilogy itself is just one of the top fantasy trilogies that I've ever read. So I definitely had to check out his new book, The Bright Sword, which is based on the legend of King Arthur. I was not at all familiar with the minutiae of the Arthurian legend. I definitely know the broad strokes, but I never read The Once and Future King or any of those other books that dive into it, and I've only seen 4 King Arthur movies that I could recall. They were all, so-so. Actually, I think they're all pretty good. First Night is definitely the worst of the 4, but I think all of them did the Arthurian mythology justice in its own way, in their own ways. But I was definitely interested in getting his take on it and seeing how different it would be from The Magician, since I've never read one of his books that didn't take place in that world. But I really like his writing style, and I was looking forward to seeing how it would be with different material, different characters. So this book is definitely a doorstop. 670 pages. It's huge. I finished reading it about a week or two ago, but I wanted some time to just kind of ruminate on it. And this is the first book I've read in a while that I felt compelled to make a video about. Partially, of course, because, sad face, 0 people commented on my other videos, so I'm not sure that anyone will comment on this one either, but wanted to get these thoughts out of my head regardless. And who knows, maybe this time a discussion will bloom in the comment section. A girl can dream. So I do have some critical feedback of the book. Even though I enjoyed reading it, there were definitely some things that I want to question about it. And then there are some things that came up as I was looking through other people's booktube reviews of the book. There are plenty of those, but once again, like with the last fantasy novels that I put on YouTube, there were no books that really dove into the details and the full plot. So that's my purpose here. First of all, something that bugged me about the book is that there were absolutely no there was no table of contents. So whenever I run across a book that actually goes to the trouble of titling the chapters, for some reason I also want a table of contents as well. So that was kind of a disappointment, and I was so annoyed by it, and I'm such a big nerd, that I actually went to the trouble of making my own table of contents. So that's it right there. And I don't know, maybe the author decided not to do it because he felt that the table of contents would give away the plot of the story. There is an argument to be made for some of those chapter titles being giveaways once you have started reading the book and you kind of have an idea of where it's going. But I don't think any of them are enough of a giveaway that they should have omitted the table of contents altogether. So that was a little bit of a miss for me. Now, the structure of the book is something else that I would want to get into. It has a flashback structure. So after every 2 or 3 chapters, you jump back in time to learn more about one of the other knights of the Round Table. So it's almost always called the Tale of So-and-so. And unfortunately, I felt that these flashbacks were very misplaced for the most part. Some of them, like the Tale of Sir Bedivere, came along at the right moment, narratively speaking. But others just really felt like they were yanking you out of the main narrative for no reason, or that there was a better place for the story to have been, for that person's story to have been put, juxtaposed with the main story. And the flashbacks were very unbalanced because some of them, like the Tale of Sir Bedivere, are 3 parts long, and you get to learn so much about this single character. And okay, maybe he's one of the main Knights of the Round Table, and that's the reason, But the other characters, I mean, it's an ensemble story, so the other characters also play a big part in the story, and yet we don't get to learn as much about them. Sir Dinadan, for example, only gets one chapter. Um, and then there's the tale of Sir Dagonet and Sir Scipio, and for some reason, I'm sorry, not Scipio, Constantine, and for some reason they have to share their flashback chapters, and it's really a disservice to Constantine because it's really Sir Dagonet's story, and Constantine is just kind of there. So we never really got to dive into Constantine's character at all. And then we learn even worse that he dies off screen, so to speak, killed by Lancelot. And I'm just like, ugh, justice for Constantine. He was one of the characters I was most intrigued by. So I would have really liked to learn more about him. So that's upsetting. By the way, I probably should have led this video by saying spoilers. I did mention I'm going to get into the plot, so I think a normal, reasonable, logical person could assume that there would be spoilers, but just in case you're not one of those types of people, whoops, sorry, I did spoil the death of Constantine. But, let that serve as your warning that the rest of this video will be spoilers. It's not really a review at all. It's just a deep dive. There are plenty of other reviews, and as I've said, I liked the book but had issues with it. That's enough of a review for me. So the next thing was the positives. Like, there were some fantastic scenes, and just like with the magicians, there were some real standout moments in this book. And some of those, for example, were the fight between Merlin and Nimue. That was so good that I really don't understand why Nimue only got one flashback chapter. I really think she should have gotten a lot more time to dive into her relationship with Merlin a bit more and her study of magic a bit more. And what we did get was pretty cool. So I did like that. The Lancelot fight with Colum at the end, also very good. The Green Knight fight, so all of the fight scenes with Colum, really. And then the Angels versus Fairies fight, like that was really amazing. It was so cinematic, and even before the fight started, their journey to this church, walking along the Sword Road, up in the sky, like that was really a great visual, and he did a fantastic job with that scene. And I've read so many different books, like the Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials series, and others, where the authors describe angels in different ways. My absolute favorite is a story by Ted Chiang, where he describes angels as these phenomena of nature, and it's called Hell is the Absence of God, and it's one of the best short stories I've ever read. So I always enjoy the way that different authors depict angels in their texts, and the way that he describes the angels is really fantastic. It's just a little bit typical, but he puts his own spin on it, which I really appreciate. A little originality to the angels concept is always welcome. But on the other hand, there were some parts of the book, unfortunately, that were boring. The chapter called The Wastelands, why is that there? Didn't dig it. It forced us to get more details about Arthur and his relationship with his wife, Guinevere. And since Guinevere does pop up later and winds up becoming a pretty important character, since obviously they pick her to be the new ruler of Camelot for however long that lasts. Okay, I can understand why he wanted us to get to know Guinevere. That whole chapter is told from her perspective. But it was so boring. And the position in the story was just like a dead stop to the action. It was not well placed at all. I think he should have found a better spot in the story to put that, and he should have found a way to make it more interesting. Guinevere and Arthur shooting arrows into rocks and tree stumps while they wander around a field and talk is just not interesting. So he really should have found a way to improve that. Similarly, the Avalon interlude, when they meet up with Morgan Le Fay. Okay, we're going to talk about Morgan Le Fay too. Didn't love that. It was a little bit boring. And obviously, some important things happened there, but I just think it could have been made more interesting, more dynamic. Um, the fact that they had went to go see Arthur in his dreams, I don't know, was that really the best way to handle it? I mean, I'm not the one writing this book. Obviously, he thought so, but I think he could have done better with the Avalon scenes. I don't have any specific actionable advice on how it could have been better, short of like having Arthur actually get up and walk around and talk to them in real life, which was unrealistic. But something, I don't know, something could have changed there. Okay, and then since I mentioned Morgan Le Fay, let's get into some of the characters. I really loved the way that he handled characters like Sir Bedivere, um, Sir Dinadan, even though he only got one chapter, I felt was handled well. I felt like I understood that character and that character's motivations, although, again, more chapters would have been nice, more details would have been nice. I really would have preferred to get a chapter understanding how Sir Dinadan was able to keep that secret for so long of not having a typical male body. Or Sir Dinadan mentions in the only chapter we get that he's going to go off and have relationships and be married and stuff like that. Okay, well, to women, to men, to whom? We get this weird epilogue where we find out that I guess he had a wife, but we don't get any further details. Were there children? You know, did they find a way to adopt? Did Sir Dinadan ever find a way to actually change his body to a male body? You know, it would have been nice to find out. And I guess, I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that, and part of me is kind of cringing that I'm asking these questions because I know that trans people are always saying that non-trans people, I don't like the word cis, sorry, I don't use it, but they're always, and I know immediately that's going to make people roll their eyes like I'm some kind of transphobe, but okay, if that's your judgment of me, what can I do about it? But anyway, as I was saying, trans people do say that non-trans people ask too many questions that are really none of our business about their bodies and about the surgery and all that. And I can understand why that's frustrating, or maybe I can't. You know, I'm not trans, so I can't claim that I understand anything really. But I think I can understand what they mean, like why those questions are kind of gross and intrusive and all of that. Unfortunately, that's true, but it's also true that, well, yes, we're just curious. We can't help that curiosity. So, as a book reader who is curious to know a lot more about the characters that I'm reading about, it's a fine line. And, you know, that's something that I think is open to discussion. Is it okay to ask for those personal details of a person who doesn't exist that you're curious about because you've gotten attached to them and you want to know more about their journey and how they found happiness, a character that you liked and were rooting for? Is it okay to ask those questions, or is it still not okay, even though that, again, is a fictional character? I don't know. Maybe the answer is you're rude, you're wrong, you shouldn't be allowed to ask that of anybody, even if they don't exist. I don't know. I'm leaving it open to interpretation. Feel free to tell me in the comments that I'm out of line, but I do think that was something that was missing in the chapter, and I'll go into more detail about why I didn't like the epilogue later, but that was certainly one part of it. And then Merlin. I was so disappointed in how Merlin was handled. Oh, by the way, I'm checking the book. Dinadan had married and been widowed. So it doesn't specifically say that Dinadan married a woman. So again, yeah, that's in the epilogue. Okay, we'll get to that. I'm jumping ahead here. So let me go back to why I'm annoyed about the Merlin thing. Merlin obviously is one of the most iconic characters in literature, or really just period. Not even necessarily literature. We're talking film, we're talking poetry, we're talking possibly history. Merlin has popped up everywhere from Harry Potter to, you know, any other random book or movie you could mention that deals with magic. So to use Merlin as a villain, I think is a good choice, but to cast him as a villain without also giving us a little bit more insight into why he's a villain in this version of the story, when in every other version he's been considered a heroic helper to Merlin, I think is doing the story a disservice, because you're turning the reader's expectations, which is great. I don't necessarily want Merlin to always be the good guy. I like the fact that he wanted Merlin to be evil, and believe me, he is evil in this book. But I just didn't understand why. And they did explain to some extent, Merlin used to be a druid, but he turned his back on the druids and begged for mercy from the Romans and agreed to help the Romans, so he betrayed his people. And then the fairies want him dead, but they don't tell us why. They give us this "he knows what he did" type of shit. And I'm just like, come on, okay, he knows, but I don't know. I'm a reader. I want to know. And I mean, I can intuit the reason based on all the clues given, but at no point were any of my guesses actually validated or proven right or wrong. I just have to wonder, okay, maybe that's the reason, but then again, maybe it was something else. Maybe he just slept with the wrong fairy sister. I don't know. So that was a little annoying, a little frustrating. And then Merlin pops up a couple times in the main narrative. He pops up in the flashback with the Moo, which I'll get to, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name right, but that's how I will be pronouncing it for the rest of the video, so apologies if it's wrong. And he pops up at the very end, kind of pointlessly, only to fulfill the prophecy of Dinadin killing him, basically, or prophecy. I don't even know if you want to... Yeah, the whole "only a man can kill me" thing counts as a prophecy, so yes. But he just didn't appear often enough for us to really get to know him as a character or fully understand his villainous motivations, especially because he was used as a rapist, and he tried to rape Nimue, and she gets away, obviously, in this epic fight scene, and obviously a guy who tries to do that is clearly a villain. And I'm not saying we need to understand why a man wants to rape a woman. That's ridiculous. Of course, the reasons are pretty obvious. But what I'm saying is that if Merlin was seen by Arthur and by all of these other people as someone who was instrumental to Arthur's rise to power, someone who wanted to preserve Britain, why can't we get to know a little bit more about what he's wrestling with, what he's dealing with, the guilt he might feel for betraying the druids, if he's capable of guilt. This version of Merlin seems like he probably isn't. But I would have liked to learn a bit more. So a Merlin backstory chapter would have really been good to have. I also wanted more scenes with Lancelot. He doesn't get a backstory chapter at all. He's pretty much a blank slate. So he's just this action hero guy who, of course, becomes the villain. And the way his fighting style is described makes him seem pretty much supernatural. And we get a little bit of his backstory in terms of him being trained by fairies, just like Dinadin was, so we understand why he's such a good fighter. And we get a tiny, tiny bit of his backstory to understand why he wanted to turn on Arthur. Frankly, it's a little silly once we finally figure it out. It has to do with a bird pond, of all things. So, I just didn't think that Lancelot was fleshed out enough as a villain. So, both of the main villains, Lancelot and Merlin, just didn't get too much backstory. And should I say both? Because it's hard to know whether to count Morgan Le Fay as a villain either. Let's get into Morgan. Okay, Morgan Le Fay was set up as an antagonist. Well, first she was just a random person in an inn. She's literally like the second character we meet, not counting the guy that Colin kills, who turns out to be his father, which I thought was a dumb twist, but whatever. So she's really the second main character that we meet, but we don't know who she is when we meet her. And she seems like someone who's trying to help Colin. And then we learn later, okay, she was helping him, but for her own gain, because she wants to take over the throne. And then because Colin says no, and none of the other knights are willing to support that, she becomes an antagonist. But then when they lose the battle, she's kind of back on their side, helping them again. So it's just like back and forth. And by the end, she seems to have resigned herself to never taking the throne and to helping Guinevere. And it's just kind of like, what was the point of Morgan? Did she add or contribute anything to the main narrative besides a cool action scene with all the fairies and the angels? I'm not sure. Her backstory with Arthur was definitely interesting, but the way that we got it was mostly just done through her talking to Colin in exposition. We didn't get a nice little flashback scene with her until the very end, and it was super brief. So I just don't know how I feel about Morgan. I started talking about her without actually having a conclusion or final decision in my mind. I did like the character. I just think it could have been handled a little bit better. The inconsistency was a little odd. Another great scene, Scipio versus the demon, or rather, a scene that could have been. That demon reveal was super cool, by the way. So that was a great scene. And the way he described the demon with like the extra mouth in its stomach, I've never seen something like that before, so that was cool. But I really wanted more scenes with Lancelot, and I wanted more scenes. I wanted more of that scene in particular, is what I'm trying to say. Because we leave Scipio fighting the demon to what Colin is sure is going to be his death. And since Scipio doesn't turn up again, I guess we can assume he did die. But that demon thing was like, well, where did it come from? Who sent a demon? Was it literally from hell? So if so, why is hell getting involved in what they're doing? Because hell doesn't want them to find the lance. I don't know. It was a little strange. It was a cool scene, but when you kind of dig into it, it's like, what is happening here? And since we didn't get to get anything after that, they just leave, and the demon and Scipio are just left behind for good. That's it. We never get any further answers to that. So that just seemed like a huge dangling thread that should have been woven into the plot. You could even call it a plot hole if you like. Yeah. Just looking at my list here. There were typos in the book. That was lame. One of the chapters is supposed to be called A Young Knight, I believe, but it's spelled Y-O-N-G. Super sloppy. I even tweeted Lev Grossman about it to ask if that was a typo. Did not get an answer. Gonna assume that it was. And as I mentioned, I did not like the reveal that the knight Colin fought at the very beginning was his father. If that was going to be the case, the reveal should have been handled a lot better. It was a complete throwaway at the end where it's like, oh, by the way, that was your dad. Oh, really? Okay, well, I don't feel anything. He doesn't have any real reaction to it because he's so tired and drained from what has been happening in the climax of the story. So that was just a weird time to put it in there. If they had put it in before the climax, I think it would have been a great motivation for Colin in the fight with Lancelot, because it would have been like he's reliving the fight that he had with his father, but this time he's fighting against someone that he knows instead of a stranger, and it's like he's taking out his frustrations at fighting a stranger that turned out to be his father on Lancelot. So in the fight we had with Lancelot, we got, I mean, again, it was a really good scene, so I'm not really complaining about that scene. I'm just saying that if the reveal about the father had been placed before that scene, it could have not only made that scene even stronger, it could have made the reveal even stronger, and it could have made the reveal more relevant to the plot. So I really think that was mishandled. Okay, now the last few things I want to talk about are all, unfortunately, negatives. Let's start with the least of the three negatives, which is the epilogue. Why does the epilogue exist? It's 2 pages long. It has nothing to do with any of the main characters except Dinadan. And Dinadan is arguable whether Dinadan counts as a main character, because we know that Colin is the main character. And after everything we've read and everything we've learned, the epilogue that I wanted was to find out if Colin got to live happily ever after. Did he marry Nimue or Nimue, however you pronounce her name? Did they have kids? Did he continue serving as a knight? How did things end up going with Guinevere? I mean, there's none of that. There's zero of that. Instead, we get a teeny tiny bit of information about Dinadan's life, and then Dinadan leaves England, and then he goes on these adventures in other parts of the world, but we don't get any information about those adventures either. It's just like Dinadan got on a horse and rode through, and people thought his horse was cool and he looked good, and then he died under a tree and he thought about the bright world. I'm like, huh? What? Why was any of that important? What did it have to do with anything? It almost seemed like Lev Grossman really had this title in mind for his book, The Bright Sword. And then towards the end, he started panicking that even though he talked extensively about swords, he hadn't mentioned the word bright enough. And he's like, let me come up with something quick to just kind of staple onto the back of this story so that the word bright makes more sense in the title. Like, I don't know why else we needed that. Very frustrating. Okay, and then we have to get into a couple of topics that are a little trickier. First of all, there is a YouTuber who made a video about why he didn't want to finish the book Bright Sword. And his video is labeled DNF, Do Not Finish. And the title is Woke King Arthur. All right. So this is the video that I'm talking about. And this is ridiculous, honestly. Out of all the different reviews and stuff I found of the book, I thought that this video was absolutely the most clown shit. It is so stupid. He is basically saying the book is woke and that's why he won't finish it, because a gay character, Sir Bedivere, and a trans character, Dinadan, have completely turned him off, and presumably there are more. I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't finish watching his video because he's a liar. He said that he put the book down after 50 pages, but there's nothing woke that happens in the first 50 pages. Sir Bedivere is revealed as gay on like page 56. I'm going to check it and I will reinsert that information into this edit. So we don't know until then that that Bedivere is actually gay, and the trans reveal doesn't come until even later in the book. So basically, if he was like exaggerating that it wasn't exactly 50 pages, fine, but that means he threw the book down as soon as he ran into one gay character. So fucking lame. And is this book really woke? You want to argue that Palamedes, for example, is a woke character because he's a non-white character. He's part of the Arthurian legend. There was always a Muslim knight involved in the story. And the fact that Guinevere becomes queen in the end, is that woke? Okay, well, she was second in line, technically. They didn't have any kids. So who else is going to do it? Arthur's son is dead. He does have sisters, but they're problematic. His wife could easily take over, and if not the wife, it would have been one of the sisters. So either way, you're getting a woman queen. Is that woke? Or is that just succession? I mean, grow up. This idea that anything that's non-white or non-straight is woke is so stupid. So I just think that this idea of thinking of characters who A, aren't real people, didn't really exist, and even if they did exist, we have no way of verifying what their sexuality may or may not have been. So why, deprive yourself of a really good read just because your tiny brain can't handle that? So stupid. And then another couple of issues. I'm going to save the worst one for last. So there's British identity. I'm not British, as you can tell by my American accent. And I thought that the British identity issue was really interesting. This actually isn't a negative. I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but I skipped it on my list by mistake. Whoopsie. I thought that it was interesting how they got into this idea of the Angles coming to their land. And then Morgan goes on this expedition dump about how the Angles are going to change Britain completely, and it will eventually be named after them, so we know that Angleland becomes England. Actually, I think she says that directly. And then she talks about how the original Britons who ran away from the Angles were to be given the name Welsh, which means foreigner or runaway or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So Welsh people are actually like more native to Britain than English people are. That's very interesting. So the Saxons and all those people who are coming over who eventually become the people who make up the British Isles, I thought was very interesting because politically in the UK, you have, this movement against immigrants similar to what's going on in the United States, but perhaps slightly less dystopian at the present time. And when you think about someone like Nigel Farage and the UKIP party and this Brexit movement that was largely successful because so many people were upset about immigration, you're painting a pretty nasty picture there. And so you rewind the clock and you realize, oh, these people were also immigrants and invaders. I think that's hilarious. So, I don't know, maybe Nigel Farage is Welsh for all I know, but I'm really not sure about that. I'll have to check on that one. But if the Welsh people are the only ones who are technically, what we think of as British, like native British, the rest of these people are also invaders from somewhere else. So it's the same thing in my country, all of these white people going, go back to your country, bitch, go back to yours. This wasn't your land. So I really like that. Now, obviously, again, I'm not British, so there's only so far I can go with that because I can't really get into all the details about British identity. But on a surface level, as someone looking in from the outside, bloody hilarious. I love that. And then finally, the heaviest topic. This is where we kind of get back to the magicians, because there's one particular thing that is mentioned at the beginning of the book, which is that Colin was sexually abused when he was living with his foster father knight. Not the knight. The guy was some kind of a petty lord. And he treated Colin like crap and allowed him to sleep in a public area where men would come into his bed and abuse him. So, Lev Grossman doesn't get into the details of that abuse. He does mention the shame that it left Colin with. So, I can't sit here and say, oh, this is exactly what happened when Colin was abused. But then at the end, towards the end of the book, when he hooks up with Nimue, Nimue, I should have really learned how to pronounce her name before I recorded this. When he hooks up with her, she says something to him like, you're not going to be able to do any of the cool miracles now that you're no longer a virgin knight. And I thought that was really interesting because it means that losing his innocence is tied up with sexuality, and that becoming sexually active means that you've lost some kind of access to divine power. So it kind of makes you wonder if he was abused, and again, trigger warning, I should have said that a while ago, sorry. If he was abused as a child, how did that not already take his innocence and prevent him from being able to do any of the divine miracles? So I really question Lev Grossman's judgment in putting that information at the beginning of the book, and I wonder what its purpose was. Perhaps he did it to be more realistic because he knew that things like that did happen at that time. They've been happening throughout all of human history, unfortunately, because people are fucked up. Maybe he put it in because he really wanted to give Colin more trauma in his backstory. If so, I think there was already plenty. We already heard about him getting beaten, starved, verbally and physically abused, kicked out of the house, neglected, abandoned. It was a long list. We didn't have to add sexual abuse to that list to already feel horribly sorry for Colum and to already see his amazing growth as a character who had to deal with that level of trauma. Not necessary. And then it kind of flashes back to what he did with Julia in The Magician's second book, The Magician King, because that is notorious. And he even said in an interview that he wouldn't do the same thing again. Now that he's older and wiser, now that he's seeing the backlash, I'll have to show a clip from the interview because I don't remember exactly what he said. But, yeah, basically, he puts Julia in a situation where she gets raped. Sorry, trigger warning. If you haven't read the book, spoiler alert. And that rape gives her amazing cosmic powers. Like, she becomes one of the most powerful magicians the world has ever seen as a result. But it also destroys her. Like, it strips her of her humanity. There's even an extremely graphic description where she says that when she felt the rapist's penis come out of her, she felt like there was something stuck to the end of his penis that he took out of her with him. And it's implied that that was her soul, or that was her humanity. So it was an extremely graphic and intense scene. And now he's doing something, in my opinion, that's similar, where he has this mention of child abuse, which, even though he doesn't get into graphic detail, is something that has a huge effect on a person, obviously, in real life. And then he also has this attempted rape scene, and then these two characters, one who was a victim of an attempted rape, and one who was a victim of, again, sexual abuse, the extent to which we don't even know. But he says it happened repeatedly, so that really seems to imply rape as well. And it's like, well, his ability to do miracles is gone. Essentially his connection to magic is gone because of the abuse. But in Julia's case, her connection to magic was strengthened because of the abuse. Like, make up your mind. Does sexual abuse enhance your powers or diminish your powers? So it's kind of a gross thing to ask, no pun intended. I'm not saying he is a gross man for doing it. Rim shot. But I am saying that it's troubling that he has both of these things in his two main series. I don't know, again, I'm saying series, but let's say his two big works, his magnum opus. I don't know, whatever. Magnum opus? What's the plural? His two major publications, because I'm counting The Magicians as like one big thing. In fact, if you put it all together, it would probably be about as long as The Bright Sword. So yeah, in both of these worlds, in both of these stories, sexual abuse happens, but in one story it doesn't seem to have an effect, and in the other story it does. So, I don't know, you can just say, well, they're two different worlds, so why are you even wasting time speculating on this? But it's not so much that it's the different worlds, it's the fact that it's the same author, and that he goes to the extent of putting this stuff in his texts. It makes me think he must feel some type of way about it. Now, he himself, for example, has a trans child, and he mentioned that as one of the reasons for including a trans character in this book, because he had all these conversations with his child to get all the insight into writing Dinadan more realistically. So we know that he pulls things from his own life and puts his own perspectives into these books. So the fact that he's done this with sexual abuse twice just really makes me a little bit concerned about, what aspect of his life he might be putting in there. So that was the last thing I wanted to talk about. Overall, it was an enjoyable read. I really liked it. Is it something I would read again? I don't know. maybe like in a long time. I could see myself kind of dusting it off in 10 or 15 years if I'm still around and the world still exists, and being like, oh yeah, I kind of sort of remember that book. Let me read it again. I'm not sure how many of these scenes or characters would really stick with me, because even though it was a good book, um, I don't think it had the strongest characters. Colum himself, not the strongest main character. He was definitely outshone by a lot of the side characters. And, that kind of thing is going to happen when you're dealing with a story that's this famous, I guess, and characters who are this well known. It's kind of hard to come up with a character who can stand the test of time as well as they do. So, unfortunately, no, Colin doesn't pass that test. And the story itself is a pretty interesting take on the overall Arthurian legend. I think it can definitely stand shoulder to shoulder with the Once and Future King and some of these other stories that have taken the Merlin legend and twisted it. It's just his version of the not Merlin legend, the Arthurian legend. It's his version of the Arthurian legend, and I think it's definitely worth a read. Obviously, it's going to take you a while to read the whole thing, but I definitely recommend hanging in there. And if you have read it and you have any comments, anything you'd like to tell me about my analysis, obviously let me know. Anything you want to correct me on, argue with me about, I'm open to that. Just keep it respectful and let's have a discussion. Maybe this time it'll actually turn into a discussion. We'll see. Fingers crossed. I'm Keela Rose. See you in the pages.